Hello, everyone. Welcome to this CluePoints webinar. Very glad you could join, and thank you for your interest in joining this discussion today. So I'm gonna be discussing with you the topic of harnessing risk-based quality management and deep learning to improve trial knowledge and drive better outcomes. My name is Steve Young. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at CluePoints, and just a little bit about myself before I jump into the topic. I've been at CluePoints for about 6.5 years now. Been a very exciting time for us and for the industry. I've been in the industry much longer than that. I grew up in clinical operations, most of that time in clinical data management. And I have to tell you it's probably about 13 or 14 years ago, actually, that I was first introduced to the concept of risk-based monitoring, and became very excited about that concept. And increasingly in my career over the past 13 years since then, I've been really focused in this area, and working with CluePoints, of course, for the past 6.5 years, and that's been fantastic as well. So I've been very passionate on the topic of RBQM and the use of analytics to further enable various aspects of risk-based quality management and risk-based monitoring. So without further ado, let's jump in. And what I'd like to do today on this topic is really go through a little bit of a journey, and it's really a CluePoints journey, but it really is a journey focusing on how we've transitioned from our traditional methods and using intelligent analytics, first mostly with statistics, and now more recently with artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, et cetera, and how we're applying that and how we will be applying it moving forward to further enable and improve various aspects of risk-based quality management. But first, a little bit of a step back. So before the age of risk-based monitoring and RBQM, as I'm sure many of us know, quality oversight, quality management in clinical research was largely, not all, but it was, the emphasis was more on, I would say, heavy manual visual inspection type of reviews. And you can think of, site monitoring, and particularly source data verification, source data review, and the traditional convention of doing comprehensive 100% review of all patient source data and comparing that to the data entered in case report forms. Data management reviews, traditionally largely manual, certainly supported by SAS programmed edit checks or other types of edit checks, but also traditionally, and I would say even today, still a significant amount of manually intensive review, leading to manual queries and data cleaning efforts. Medical and safety reviews, same thing. A lot of manual review of patient profile reports and listings and various visualizations to look for trends. And what I want to do is use a pragmatic example to illustrate not just the inefficiencies of those traditional methods, but the limitations of those methods in really effectively overseeing quality, and in particular identifying real and important issues and risks that are emerging in your trial. This example is one from an actual study that was actually studying patient weight change, and particularly endpoints related to weight loss during the trial. And this graph is an actual graph of patient weights over time at one of the sites in the trial. So you can see there's some variation, and probably what appears to be good news is the patient weights are going steadily down over the course of their participation in the trial from visit to visit. Everything looks, reasonably well, so okay. Now, if I randomly select another site and present the same data, the same graph, plotting patient weights over time on that same study, visually you can see that there is a real difference in the pattern, and particularly you could say the variability across patients. It appears at the site labeled number 6, there's a lot less variability across the different patients, between patients, than at site 7, where it seems that the patients are varying more from each other over time. But which one is one of them correct, one of them incorrect? Certainly it's odd to see such a difference, such a stark difference between two different sites, but we don't really have a frame of reference necessarily to know which one is correct and which one isn't correct. If we add a lot more sites to the picture, the problem actually becomes pretty clear. And I'm sure you've already guessed it, but that first site, site number 6, is obviously the one that's very different from all the others. All the others seem to be showing a fair amount of natural variability between patients and over time, whereas at site 6, the patients all seem very close together over time, and all of them seem to be going down at a steady rate in the same fashion over time. And indeed, on this trial, it was confirmed, I can tell you, that there was a problem with the weight data at this site. And in fact, the site was being creative, and I'll just say inventive with with the generation, the recording of patient weights on this trial. And it was an important parameter on the trial. It was related to a key endpoint in the trial. So a very important finding. Did site monitoring and SDV, SDR identify this problem? No, it did not. Nor did any of the data management reviews, any of the edit checks. All of the patient weight observations were all within a believable range, so any range type checks that might have been put into the EDC system or a back-end edit check wouldn't have flagged anything. So our traditional approaches to site monitoring and data management wouldn't necessarily. Now, you could say maybe a very sharp site monitor who's very experienced, has a really good memory across patients that they're looking at, might have noticed something. But in this case, they didn't, and I would argue, generally speaking, I wouldn't expect that this would typically be found by those methods. Same with medical safety reviews. Manual reviews of patient profiles, maybe a medical reviewer might pick it up. Very good chance that they wouldn't pick it up. You'd have to get lucky, I think, to expect that to be identified. And it wasn't on this trial. What did identify it on this trial was a centralized statistical monitoring approach. And again, just an example, a proof point of where we have significant limitations in some of our traditional methods of inspecting quality during clinical trials, and the power of intelligent analytic methods like statistical monitoring. And that's really where the CluePoints journey began. CluePoints was founded in 2012, and it was founded based on what we're now calling a smart engine, which is really a suite of statistical tests, specific statistical tests that are designed specifically to check, to assess the quality of clinical patient data in clinical trials. And these tests were created and developed and refined over a period of about 15 years before 2012. CluePoints was founded in 2012, but the basic idea is all of these tests are designed to run not just on one patient variable or data field or one domain of data, but across most or all of the patient data. So really, in a sense, you can think of a boil the ocean approach. We call it an unsupervised because it's not directed by any pre-study identification of risks for which I want to monitor those specific risks. It's based on the general idea that if you have a good set of statistical methods, you can identify anomalous patterns of data which are generally indicative of risk or potential problems at one or more sites. So the essential idea was compare the data statistically from each site with the data from all sites in the study to to identify sites that are statistically different across one or more of these different statistical tests. And it, of course, not just in the use case I showed you, but across many, many customers and trials now, continues to prove to be very powerful at doing just that, at identifying significant risks, systemic risks at sites, patterns of behavior that are leading to unreliable data generation and or data reporting. And in fact, in 2012, when CluePoints was first founded, this engine was being run by CluePoints and the results being delivered as a service. In 2014, CluePoints introduced the first version of an actual platform, a self-service cloud-based platform with a user interface that it has really enabled study teams and organizations to set up and run all of these statistical tests on their own in a user-friendly interface that doesn't require statisticians or statistical knowledge to guide them to the sites that are at most risk, and then be able to drill in and understand, you know, what are the anomalies that are causing this, and be able to act on those. This is a somewhat famous part of our interface. We call it the bubble plot, where each of the bubbles in the plot represent one of the sites in your trial, and we have a custom scoring mechanism where across all of the statistical test results of all those tests we were just talking about, an overall average score, an anomaly score, we call it a data inconsistency score, is generated. And the higher the data inconsistency score, the more at risk the site is overall. So you can see the sites in magenta that are above this threshold line represent the ones that are most at risk, the ones that you would be most interested in first looking at and exploring for risk. I'm going to stop for a minute and ask you guys to answer this poll question. So you can see it on the screen. Has your organization adopted centralized central statistical monitoring? And by that I mean in the context or in the idea that I was just presenting, this unsupervised statistical monitoring where you have some number of statistical tests that you're running against much or all of your data in your clinical trial. So I'll give you about 30 seconds. If you guys could look at the options and answer the one that best fits your organization, that would be great. And I'm going to give it about another 15 seconds so we can take a look at the results. There's a little bit of a lag in getting all the results compiled, so we'll take a look at it. It'll be interesting to see from this audience, you know, where people are in terms of statistical monitoring. Okay, let's go and take a look at the results so far. And if you haven't answered yet, you can still, I believe, you can still keep answering. But it looks like it's a pretty even. It's a pretty even spread across the board. It looks like there's only a few that haven't done central risk monitoring at all. Another 22% or so that are doing central risk monitoring, but not using the statistical methods that we just talked about. So it sounds like you're using other types of central monitoring methods like key risk indicators, QTLs, visualizations, and other things. That makes sense. Some that haven't started but are planning to. And then it looks like another 50% or so that are using it either partially or fully. Very interesting and very helpful. It's actually, in one sense, it's promising that at least 50% are already using central statistical monitoring. From my point of view, I really think it should be used across the board. I might be a little biased, but let me also talk about why. I mean, since our initial release in 2014, of course, CluePoints has expanded our platform offering, and in particular around central monitoring, in addition to the central statistical monitoring, which we call DQA, or data quality assessment. We've added key risk indicators, of course, and the ability to implement quality tolerance limits, which are also, along with data visualizations that allow you to explore the risks. So it's a much more comprehensive set of capabilities that your team has access to within our platform. It is interesting that some industry colleagues that I've talked to, even up until recently, have expressed an opinion that the central statistical monitoring approach, the DQA approach, is not really that important. It's not needed. That use of key risk indicators along with maybe visualizations, quality tolerance limits is sufficient to do an effective monitoring of risk and detection of emerging risks and issues on your study. Interestingly, very recently, our team has been able to analyze, perform analyses across our platform, across many hundreds of studies that are using both the DQA, the unsupervised statistical monitoring, and KRIs. And what we have found is that up to 40% of all of the confirmed issues resulting from the identification of risks are coming from the central statistical monitoring. And that is specifically, we've done that analysis just for those organizations and study teams that are using both components, are using key risk indicators as well as the central statistical monitoring. So that certainly is a strong evidence implication that if you're not using the central statistical monitoring and just relying on KRIs and maybe some other visualizations, you're likely missing a lot. And while we don't have a quantitative metric on this, from anecdotal evidence, a lot of the more impactful, I would say important issues are being identified using the statistical monitoring. Not always. Certainly KRIs are an important component of central risk monitoring, as are QTLs. But really a compelling statistic about the relative contribution to issue detection of these different components. And of course, we've grown beyond just the central monitoring components that are covered. Actually, let me go back for just a second on this one. I just wanted to make one more point, that sophisticated statistical methods are supporting all of these components of central monitoring. It's not just the first one, the DQA that we talked about. For example, for key risk indicators, at least in our platform, in addition to being able to set risk thresholds based on discrete values, you can also use what we call statistical or relative thresholds, risk thresholds. And that's leveraging the same statistical tests for the KRIs to be able to statistically compare how any given site is on a given KRI metric compared to the trend across the whole study. So you can identify statistically the sites that are the biggest outliers. And that's really important. That's an important thing to have, because for many key risk indicators, it's difficult to know up front, to have an independent reference of what discrete value or threshold represents a real risk. So the ability to compare within the trial sites against the overall trend is a very powerful method. And so we leverage that same advanced statistical engine for key risk indicators. Quality tolerance limits, they do require discrete thresholds because you're at a study level now. but we've introduced statistical confidence intervals. So you can now set and use a computed confidence interval as you're tracking the QTL on your study that will inform you and your study team if a given breach of your QTL limit is not really statistically significant. So again, using statistical methods to really help support the evaluation and the detection of risk across all these methods. By the way, we've also added in the last few years a module that is also based on a custom statistical algorithm that is detecting likely duplicate patients. So patients that might have enrolled in the study more than one time at different sites. And it is using a statistically based comparison to determine the relative likelihood that any given pair of patients might be a match or might be the same patient. And really the platform has really evolved from RBM specific and central monitoring specific to an end-to-end RBQM solution. So now we have a risk planning, risk assessment categorization module that allows study teams to do pre-study risk planning. We have all the central monitoring components. We have patient profiles module to allow you to set up and use patient profiles. And that as well, by the way, we call it intelligent patient profiles because it is also scoring patients statistically using the same type of smart engine test that are running at a patient level to identify patients that have unusual patterns of data compared to other patients in the study. We have a whole data visualization engine now we call Beyond Data Visualization. So the platform has really expanded and is now supporting end-to-end risk-based quality management. And of course, our client base has grown and the use on the platform has grown steadily and is actually accelerating in recent years. And what that means is that we have many, many studies worth of information, metadata, RBQM related data on our platform. As of now, we have over 1,000 studies that have been run on our platform from actually close to 90 organizations now, possibly more than that. And you can see, we have virtually all therapeutic areas represented across these studies. There's over 120,000 risk signals documented on our platform, over 30,000 actions related to those risk signals. And of course, very rapidly growing month by month. And what does that mean? We've recognized for a while that this information represents knowledge that we just need to tap into. And we can and should be tapping into that, learning from that information to help further enable optimal end-to-end RBQM outcomes. This is part of an internal mission statement that represents the real goal here, which is to lead the industry in delivery of innovative methods to enable optimal end-to-end RBQM outcomes. And you can see several key examples that we have listed there. Earliest possible detection of risk, most reliable detection of risk. So you can think of that in the central monitoring frame. And of course, it's not just about detecting risk. It's about how reliable are you at detecting risk? To what extent does it represent important findings, real issues? And it's also, as we've said, and we're very focused on at CluePoints, is enabling the earliest possible detection of emerging risk. If you have metrics and methods set up that might be somewhat reliable at detecting an issue or a risk, but detects it very late in the process, is, in other words, a lagging indicator, it doesn't do you much help because the damage has already been done at the site or sites at which the problem exists. So it's a very important aspect of effective oversight and monitoring of a clinical trial. And we continue to strive in that area. That's a key part of our goal. Effective management of risk planning and risk follow-up, of course. So that whole risk planning process. Most efficient setup and execution of the CluePoints platform. It's actually pretty efficient today. It takes a lot less time and effort to set up the CluePoints central monitoring platform for a study than it does, let's say, an EDC system. However, we want to make it, and we believe we can make it extremely efficient, meaning our goal really is less than a day from starting to actually having it all set up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, we want to generate knowledge in general and insights that help our community to enable optimal clinical research quality. An example of that is we're now developing and delivering industry benchmarked insights using information from our platform that are allowing, are starting and will start to allow our clients to start being able to assess how they're doing on various aspects of the process in RBQM and various outcomes, and how that compares with the trend across all other organizations. So just one example of how we're tapping knowledge and sharing that knowledge. So that's really taken us from where we started in statistical methods, which are still at the core of our platform, advanced and very sophisticated statistical methods, and will continue to be for years to come. But of course, we've recognized that machine learning and deep learning and natural language processing are additional tools that are very powerful and can be very powerful to supplement and extend our capabilities in RBQM and to achieve our goals. And you can see from this overall timeline, I won't go through all the detail, but in 2017, we actually deployed our first machine learning-based solution that was targeted to help identify risk signals, outputs of the statistical engine that should most likely be looked at as risk signals based on the history of risk signals that have been created to date. That still is supporting our users on the platform. We've gotten much more into deep learning methods and started applying them as early as 2019 and 2020. And we're continuing to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about another example of what we've deployed to help with risk and issue detection and risk management, and what we're planning to do moving forward. Just a moment about why deep learning. I have to just say for a second that I'm not the expert in deep learning. We have a fantastic team at CluePoints that we've really been lucky and honored to have, but and a growing team that are true experts in deep learning. And you know, but in short, it's because deep learning is very powerful. It was introduced by Google back in 2017, and it's very powerful at translating tasks, and that's important for very complicated learning scenarios where the context of information that you're learning from is very complex, is very variable, multidimensional, as it tends to be in our space in clinical research. And there are powerful models that have been developed and are available to rely on. And so we are leveraging that, and it's an important component. As the bullet says, it offers great opportunities to support clinical research. Okay, so where do we plan to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning to lead and to enable optimal RBQM? Well, across really the whole span, from start to finish, starting with the risk planning process and risk assessment. We're already in discovery phase of looking at applying machine learning techniques and NLP techniques to improve risk assessment. I'll talk a little bit about that. Data processing, reduce time for study setup, as I talked about, the central monitoring, including the generation of risks, risk signals, the management of signals and actions, and actually getting to confirmation of the risks that actually were concluded to be issues. So a little bit about the risk assessment part of it, and I won't go deep into it, but natural language processing we see as an important tool, and it specifically can be used to screen study documents, particularly the protocol, to help extract from protocols risk information that's pertinent for risk assessment. What's the critical data? What are the critical processes in this study? And combining that with other information to identify what are the likely risks for this type of trial. So it's in discovery phase, but we're actively looking to implement solutions in this area to really help make the risk assessment process more efficient, more effective, more reliable by feeding the study team with the information they need to do an effective risk assessment. Along the same or similar lines, we're planning to take the outputs of risk detection from history trials. So what were the risks that actually manifested themselves as real issues and maybe at a high volume of real issues, and feeding that knowledge back into the risk planning process, again, using machine learning techniques. So for data processing in particular, we've already developed a solution. It's not in the production platform yet, but very close. That is already showing significant benefit in reducing study setup activity and effort. And in particular, the one that I'm referring to is using machine learning and NLP to identify, for instance, where data sets should be filtered on which variables in order to prepare them for the statistical testing or KRI testing, and to identify which of the tests on that filtered data should be used. That's a relatively manually intensive part of the process previously, which is now going to be highly automated part of the process. And we're looking at all aspects of study setup, deriving data sets, data harmonization. So part of that whole loading ETL process of configuring your study setup, setting up key risk indicators, QTLs. We also actually have a project in discovery phase to do SDTM mapping. So taking source data and actually learning how to map that data to the appropriate SDTM domains and variables. So that's a really exciting project. And really more broadly than that, what we're looking into more and more is using NLP, machine learning, for data, more generally data concept mapping, which has various highly valuable applications, certainly in RBQM and really across the clinical research domain. So taking, for instance, understanding that on this particular trial, this variable represents a blood pressure, systolic blood pressure. That's a very simple example, something like that. But think of it across all of your different data domains and data sets. Basically understanding, being able to recognize the concept by learning from hundreds, thousands of previous trials worth of data to learn those concepts. And then the central monitoring leading to risk signals, management of signals, confirmed issues is of course a big area of development and opportunity for machine learning and deep learning. I just want to use a conceptual example to kind of explain what we're planning to do and where we're headed with signal detection, with risk detection, and central monitoring. And you can think of this this oval, gray oval here. Think of it conceptually as the whole set of all risk signals currently detected in CluePoints. Well, you can break them down into two, maybe roughly two subsets. There are those risk signals that turn out to be actual issues, and I call them study conduct issues. You can call them quality issues, but they actually turn out to be real issues. And then there's another set that honestly turn out to be, the conclusion is that they're explainable. Yes, they're anomalous patterns of data. It's a KRI that exceeded a threshold, whatever it is. But when we've investigated it, when we've maybe gone to the site or talked to the site, we've concluded that this is an explainable anomaly, and that's fine. And there is a significant percentage of those that happen, perhaps more than half that happen today. Where are we going with detection of risks in the future? Well, thinking of that same oval with all of the, all of the risks detected, the actual ones were on the left, in the left half. Think of, instead of the ones that were concluded to be risks, the ones that were concluded not to be, we're going to detect, we're going to be able to point study teams much more effectively and in a prioritized way to what are the risks that are the highest priority risks. What are the risks that are the lowest priority risks? And you can kind of think of it as a continuum. All the way over to the left are the ones that are the most likely issues, the highest impact or most critical issues, and over towards this now smaller right side are the ones least likely to be impactful issues. And then there's a whole other set that we wouldn't even create signals for in the future. Even though they're anomalies, we've learned through machine learning, deep learning, we've learned that these particular types of anomalies are virtually never actual issues. So they shouldn't even, be created. Now, this is a conceptual diagram, how often that's really the case, but certainly it is the case that, or is going to be the case, that we were able to identify the types of, the context of clinical data and the types of anomalies against certain types of clinical data that never result in issues. In other words, we're learning, and we're using machine learning, deep learning, NLP to achieve this goal. Again, by the way, risk prioritization factors, likelihood of being an actual issue, and that is really, we're using ML to enable that. We're using deep learning to enable that. Volume of patients and data involved, right? So what is the scope of the problem? Is it affecting a lot of patients at one site or multiple sites in a region? How much actual data is involved in this? And of course, is it critical data? Has it been identified as critical data or not? Which is, of course, one of the things you can do in the platform is you can mark which of your data variables or domains are considered critical domains in the study. So all of that information can be used to effectively prioritize risks for your study team and lead to a much more efficient, reliable process moving forward. So towards that automation, how are we going to do it? I mean, the goal, of course, is to help the study team focus on risk signals that matter. We have, a whole library of many thousands of risk signals across, as I said, over 1,000 studies already and growing. And for each risk signal, we have documentation from the study team, because study teams are using the workflow management, the signal management capabilities within the platform to follow up on their signals, to document the follow-ups that they're doing, their assessment of and their conclusions on the signal. So we're using a deep learning model with training data, labeled training data that is allowing us to identify the types of risk signals that are actual issues. And that's very important because that learning now can then be used to better predict at the very creation of signals to really lead to the goal that I was talking about of more effectively prioritizing signals at their very creation. What we need is, and what we've recognized that we need with our customers, is that really good signal documentation to create the proper labels to train the model. And along those lines, so, for issue prediction, we need a large volume of signals. We need the documentation supporting issue and reliable categorization of signals. Is each risk signal, what was the conclusion of each risk signal? Was it an issue or was it a non-issue? If it was an issue, what type of issue was it? We've introduced on our platform, as part of the signal documentation, what we call as a root cause feature. It's basically just a category that needs to be selected and applied at the conclusion of a risk signal, when the risk signal is resolved or closed. And then we've used deep learning, machine learning, and natural language processing to actually support that process of both of documenting what's happening with your signal and of properly selecting the proper conclusion category. So as an example, and this is actually in our platform, it's been there for, I guess, 1.5 years, 2 years now, probably 2 years that it's been used or being used. But you can see as an example here, here's a status of the risk signal. It was active, it's been moved to closed, and you can see there's a pop-up window here. It's a reminder. Please consider further documentation, as there's not enough information for our ML model to predict the issue status of this signal. In other words, your documentation at this point seems to be not clear enough. And when I say documentation, it's all the comments that have been entered, all the actions created, the action responses, all the information that's been documented around this risk signal by the study team, describing what they've done, what their conclusions are. And here we have an NLP ML solution that is interacting with the users, the people documenting the signals and closing the signals, to remind them, hey, check your signal documentation. It doesn't appear to be clear enough. And further to that, as I said before, there's this root cause category that is selected whenever a risk signal is finally closed. And once again, there is a prompt if the predicted root cause differs from what the user has selected. So in this case, the end user has selected that this was a non-issue. Please consider recording further documentation. Our ML model classifies this signal as an issue based on the information that was provided in the documentation. It doesn't mean that the ML prediction is absolutely correct all the time, but in our validation we found it's highly reliable, and it ends up being a very good soft challenge reminder to the end user, which ends up supporting better documentation. In fact, we've been running metrics, and what we found that is, for instance, that since this feature has been released in the past year, the percentage of unclear signals, in other words, not clearly documented signals, has reduced from somewhere just over 40% to now under 30%. And that's just in the first year since the release of this feature. So it is making a real difference and leading us and our client organizations towards better documentation practices. So a very powerful, real pragmatic example of how machine learning, deep learning is helping the process. And because we're getting better documentation, means the ultimate goal that I mentioned before, of getting to more effective signal creation in the first place is now much more readily achievable than it might otherwise be. Okay, I just want to take a few more minutes to talk about several additional use cases for deep learning that we're now working on, perhaps more recently, but very exciting developments, not specific to centralized risk monitoring, but definitely relevant to trial oversight and in at least the first two cases, risk-based data management. The first one is query detection. So that's the idea there is to automatically detect data discrepancies and recommend queries to be raised for those type of queries and discrepancies that are usually the result of manually intensive data management reviews, as I mentioned earlier. So it's using deep learning, machine learning to actually figure out based on the data, when, and where do I see something that requires a query. So very exciting project. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Medical coding, of course, that's the dictionary coding. That's adverse events and concomitant medications for the most part. And so we're using machine learning to automatically code AE and med terms. And then the third one is clinical signal detection. And the goal there is to automatically detect emerging clinical and safety trends or signals of interest, not specifically quality, like as in the central statistical monitoring and the central monitoring use case, but this is more to support medical reviewers and safety reviews and detect important signals emerging in a study. So a little bit about each. For detection of data queries, we are partnering with a fairly large organization on this one. And again, the idea is we're using the machine learning to learn from hundreds of previous studies and learning from the data management queries that were generated in those studies, and really the manual ones in particular. That represents the most resource-intensive work, typically for data management. And then basically applying deep learning methods to learn from the queries and the context, the data context around those queries. And often that data context, it's not simple. It's not just one out of, again, it's not like an out of range or a missing data value in a field. Those are handled by the automated EDC edit checks. We're talking about things that are the result of much more complex relationships. Comparing AEs to conmeds, having an AE that I'm thinking is ongoing, more than a certain amount of days, should have been resolved, or had an onset during drug exposure and wasn't expected to be not related to study drugs, something like that. There's all sorts of examples of those more complex type of what you can call potential discrepancies or data anomalies. And this is what the goal of our solution is and of this initiative. And what I can say is so far we're still in a proof of value stage, but the progress is fantastic. What we have demonstrated and proven is that we are being effective at identifying a significant amount of data management queries. And the more data we feed in and the more we refine the model, we're very confident that over the next year that this is going to be something that goes into production and becomes a production solution. Medical coding, again, using machine learning to learn from past coding history to code more effectively adverse events to med drug and concomitant medications to WHO drug. You can see an example of the current training data set that we're working with. significant volume, over 80,000 records, 35,000 unique records. The approach we've taken is to use 80% of it to train on and 20% of it to evaluate on. That was in our initial proof of concept. And again, we're taking verbatim text, running it through this deep learning model, and the output it's providing is one or more suggested dictionary terms, low-level terms, as is in the case of this example. Just real quickly, accuracy achieved to date is extremely impressive. So AE coding, we're already well over 90% in terms of getting the first prediction right. So the term that the machine learning model is choosing as the first highest probability prediction is up to 94% now. It's over 90%. We also list the top 5 predictions, and we're well over 95% already in terms of the hit rate for the top 5 predictions. What's also interesting, just another tidbit, is what I call unseen low-level terms. So what that means is it has successfully predicted the right low-level term for low-level terms that were never seen in the training set that we used. So it's really a proof point, a powerful proof point of the machine learning, deep learning technique that we're using, that it's not just training the training results in not just an ability to code to the specific terms it's trained on, but to an extended set as well. Similar results, we've more recently been working on the WHO drug coding, the drug coding. You can see we've already achieved close to 90% for the first prediction, and we're already at 95 or greater on the top 5 predictions. So really, really amazing results. So already something that we expect to be moving this to production, making it production available in the very near future. Clinical signal detection is the other one, and I'm running out of time here, I see, so I'm just going to really quickly mention what it is. It's, again, we're partnering with another fairly large organization who's helping us with training data, supplying training data and subject matter expertise. But this is for clinical, not just safety, but efficacy as well, signals. And in an initial proof of concept, we developed a deep learning model, and we demonstrated we actually were able to detect a major safety signal on several studies that were all within the same program. So it was really an eye-opening achievement, and so we're moving forward on that journey to further develop this solution as well. I'm going to stop there. I just want to say in summary that I hope you've seen, that this has been helpful in showing you examples of how RBQM is being further enabled and optimized by both statistical methods and AI. The past unguided manual reviews, I've always liked this analogy of someone manually digging up the beach. Very time consuming, very resource intensive. And maybe not a perfect analogy, but today we're being guided by remote and centralized intelligence in the form of statistical methods and AI. And I also want to mention, and what's been fabulous at CluePoints is we have of course a group of PhD statisticians that continue to work on refining and developing new methods. We have a group of highly expert artificial intelligence engineers, machine learning engineers, who are working on and developing and deploying these machine learning. And by the way, they're both still represent powerful methods that should continue to be deployed and used to solve problems. and they're very complementary to each other. And when we get new business challenges or use cases presented to us, we have these groups of experts side by side, and we have a discussion, and sometimes it's not immediately clear, you know, should we be using a statistical approach to solve this problem? Should we be using machine learning, AI? But we have this group together that looks at these problems together, and with the clinical experts that we have to, you know, and with our customers to ultimately determine what is the best approach to solve these problems. And of course, it's been very successful and exciting. I'm going to end there. I apologize. I meant to end a little bit earlier, but we do have about 4 minutes for Q&A. Let me see if I can take at least a couple of the questions. So the first question I see is, do you envision that these deep learning techniques will replace the statistical monitoring engine, or will it be in support of it? That's a really good question. It's a question we periodically ask ourselves here at CluePoints as well. And I guess the answer is we don't know, but conceptually at some point in the future, it's possible that we will find that an opportunity for machine learning to actually start doing, maybe in a more efficient or effective way, what our smart engine statistical tests are doing today. But personally, I don't, based on where we've looked at, it's not something we see happening in the next couple of years or the next few years, and maybe never. What we do see, and I hope my my examples helped show that today, is that machine learning can work together with the statistical engine to complement it, to improve the effectiveness of prioritizing the risks and the anomalies that are coming out of the statistical engine. And yes, at some point, maybe machine learning will be reaching further back into the data context and starting to, you know, do part of that work that the statistical engine is doing today. Let me see if I have time for one or two more. Can you share any results or statistics around the reliability of these deep learning methods? I can't share all of them at this point. Some of them are still in progress, so I don't have updated results. I did share with you where we are with the medical coding results. And I'll tell you what, whoever asked the question, please feel free to follow up with our contact and if you have a specific question, we might be able to provide some information on that. Let's see, how does the machine learning model learn from end users and provide the ability to decide if something is an issue or not? So in terms of deciding whether something is an issue or not, the example I showed you right now is we have this, what we're calling root cause decision support, that is interacting with the users based on the documentation that they've provided to ensure that they're that they're recognizing properly whether something is an issue or not. It is not today. The ML model is not today that we have in production, is not telling the users at the beginning when the signal is first created, hey, this is very likely an issue. That's what the goal is, really the next phase of our ML implementation, deep learning implementation, is to use the knowledge now that we're gaining on which signals end up being real issues and which ones are not, and using that information to help prioritize the creation of signals in the first place. I hope that answers the question, if I understand it correctly. It looks like we're out of time. I'm sorry I couldn't get to more of your questions now. But I hope this has been helpful for you. These are very exciting times, and we're making tremendous progress with RBQM support and effectiveness, and certainly machine learning deep learning AI is becoming a bigger and bigger part of that as we move forward. So thank you very much for joining, and this concludes our webinar today. Thank you.